Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our Capo Conversations, a mini-series where we'll be giving familiar segments a topical twist. Today we revisit Pamela Z's and Nina Shekhar's perspectives on music that they have written. Here's what Pamela Z had to say.
I do think that a lot of the work that I compose is really in the realm of musique concrète, because I am using actual sounds, found sounds from the environment or, from the world around me. And I'm building the music, a lot of it out of those sounds. And I always like to say, especially if I'm talking to giving a workshop or something like that, and I'm asking people to make a found sound or a found text piece, I always have to define what I mean by found sound and found text. So when we're talking about text, I think of found text as being text that was not intended by the author to be art, but was actually maybe instructions for doing something, or the ingredients for something, or a method of assembling something that you bought from a store, from the instruction manual, or like an official notice that you may have gotten. So I take that language and it becomes the libretto, it becomes the lyrics for the work, instead of using a poem that was written by a poet that was intended from the very beginning to be art. And so then that just becomes like setting somebody else's poetry to music, or writing my own poetry or lyrics. I sometimes do write my own poetry or lyrics, but more often the text is either found text, or it might be invented text. Like I might make sounds that sound languagey. They sound verbal, but they're actually in like some kind of invented language, or a language from another planet. So, because as a singer, actually, and I think a lot of singers will relate to this, it's tricky. It's harder to sing music that has no syllables. I mean, it's hard to just sing anything other than sustained tones on just like solfege or vowel sounds. It's much easier to articulate rhythmic singing if you've got some consonants to land on, and it's more interesting, I guess, or it feels more natural and somehow communicative if there's some kind of verbal essence to the sounds. And so that's why I sometimes just start using found language, because I just need something to hang the notes on. And so the language does that for me. So I'm talking about found text now, but I can also say that with found sounds, I have a similar definition, which is that found sounds to me are sounds that are when you sample or record the sounds of actual objects or events that occur in your space or outside or whatever. So it could be me dropping my keys on the concrete floor in my studio and recording that, or it could be me filling basins of water in my kitchen sink and splashing that water to get some water samples, or it could be just recording the sounds of emergency vehicles, sirens as they go by, or birds that are singing outside my window, or and so then those become found sounds, as opposed to hiring a cellist or a trumpet player to come into my studio and then ask them to play scales throughout their entire range and record those sounds and then make a bank of samples of cello sounds or trumpet sounds. Those are just sampled musical instruments. Those aren't really found sounds. And I tend more to use the found sounds than not that I've never used samples of musical instruments, but when I use samples of my pieces, more often than not, they'll be found sounds.
Your baggage allowance comes to mind here.
There's actually two different sections in baggage allowance, at least two, that directly use found language. One of the sections is a piece called Unknown Person. And Unknown Person, the lyrics to that song are simply the questions that they always ask you when you go to board a plane, when you're traveling. I think those questions were usually asked during international travel. Did you pack your own bag, and so forth. And then I have another section in that piece where I am simply reading the little love note that the TSA leaves in your bag whenever they open your bag to inspect it. Or usually, I have found there have been times when it seemed like it had been opened and they didn't put the note in, but they're supposed to put this note in. And I happen to have one right here. And it says, to protect you and your fellow passengers, the Transportation Security Administration is required by law to inspect all checked baggage. As a part of this process, some bags are opened and physically inspected. Your bag was among those selected for physical inspection. And it goes on from there. But so I have a piece in baggage allowance that just uses that language as the text of the piece.
Here's what Nina Shekhar had to say.
For me, when I think about vulnerability, I think of kind of like ownership of identity and how we share that with others. And for me, I mean, after I wrote the piece I'm talking about is called Corkhead. After I wrote that piece, I did kind of have a period afterwards where I fell into like a quite major depression like afterwards. And I think some of that was because, after you share all this stuff about yourself that's very personal and that I hadn't shared before, I was kind of in this void afterwards, like, now what? And it was like, there's not a lot of support, for artists, like after they do something like that to, help with cope with that, and it was a really challenging time. And then I ended up, going to therapy and having some sort of support. But I think since then I've been quite protective over the way I approach vulnerability in my music and realizing like I can share things, but on my own terms, and
Absolutely.
And sometimes, I've been exploring that idea of identity in different ways, like sometimes I examine like a piece of mine I can think of called Above the Fray. It's like about sort of my relationship to classical music in general. Like that piece kind of takes the Bach cello prelude in G and warps it in different ways. And it's like also very much related to my identity, but in a very different way than like other pieces I've written. And a lot of pieces of mine sometimes do things with double meanings now. And so it's kind of interesting, or sometimes I'll throw in references. Another piece I wrote recently has a lot of references to Bollywood, and it's kind of about like sexuality and
Yeah.
in Indian cinema and things like that. And I know that most people won't recognize some of those references, but there will be, like, my mom once was in the audience for one of these pieces and she knew all the references right away. So like I think that's also become part of the way I approach vulnerability. Is like, sometimes I'm sharing things of myself, but I know that not everybody will understand it or know what is it I'm referring to. But then there will always be specific people I'm trying to reach that will understand right away. And I think it's just changed the way I approach, like, even just sharing these elements of myself with others.
That makes sense. I mean, the whole point of in jokes are there are some people who won't get them and some of people who will.
Mm-hmm.
But that the piece still works, the the various Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven pieces that have jokes in them, they still work, even if you don't.
Right. And I think in this context, I've been thinking about like, yeah, this idea of inside jokes and like who gets to be in on the joke. And I think for so long, my parents never went to classical concerts. I mean, I didn't go to an orchestra concert, like a professional orchestra concert, until my undergrad.
Oh,
And
wow.
I didn't really have that experience. And so my parents didn't grow up with like understanding you're not supposed to clap between movements. They were never like in on the joke. But that's why I feel sometimes when I do these pieces that have these references that only they can understand, it's like suddenly I flip the joke. It's like now they're the only ones, nobody
Yes.
else is, and like
Yes.
they're now suddenly in the powerful position. So I think that that's something that it's interesting, just like flipping that power dynamic in this kind of subversive way has been really fun in a sense of like how I approach identity, in my work.
Yeah, no, that I like that. What was the name of the piece you were focusing on OCD? What was
Oh yeah, it was called Quirkhead.
Quirkhead? Okay.
Yeah, like Quirk head. So,
Okay. That's what it
yeah.
sounded like.
Yeah, no, Quirkhead was just a nickname for myself. So I didn't know that OCD was like there was a term for that growing up. And so I just would always say, well, I'm very quirky. And then I just made up this name Quirkhead to describe myself. And then actually over time, because there was, I don't know, I think culturally, a lot of Asian cultures are very afraid about talking about mental illness and about OCD. And so I had a lot of shame around it, and I was like afraid to even use the word OCD. So then I would use this word Quirkhead as like a euphemism for that. So that's what the title refers to.
That's really
like
great. Yeah,
in a
yeah.
sense, a term of endearment for myself, because it sounded less scary than like OCD, like disorder in the word. For me, it's like Quirkhead. It's like, oh,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
lighthearted.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to For Good Measures Da Capo Conversations, and a special thank you to our guests for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at www.e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible by grants from the California Arts Council, the San Francisco Arts Commission, Grants for the Arts, and generous donors like you. For Good Measures produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.